Why did this billionaire willingly go to prison in communist China? This highly successful and accomplished man has called being sent to prison in China the pinnacle of his life. Jimmy Lai's life story reads like fiction. At the height of Mao's disastrous Great Leap Forward, a 12-year-old Jimmy had a decision to make. His father had lost everything when the communists took power, and his mother had been sent to a labor camp. Homeless and penniless, Jimmy snuck onto a boat headed for Hong Kong. And after getting his first job working at a glove factory, making just $8 a month, Lai eventually worked his way up to becoming a manager. And by 1989, Jimmy owned his own retail company selling to customers around the world. In just 20 years, he went from being a stowaway getting into Hong Kong with literally $1 in his pocket to being worth millions. However, following the brutal Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, something changed. After reading F.A. Hayek's famous book, The Road to Serfdom, and watching Hayek's predictions come true when government tanks rolled into Beijing to slaughter student protesters, Jimmy became convinced that he needed to use his wealth and influence to challenge the Communist Party's oppressive regime. 9 months later, he established Next Media Limited, with the goal of building a media empire in Hong Kong to promote individual liberty. Through Next Media's newspaper, the Apple Daily, Jimmy spent the next 30 years working to undermine the CCP's stranglehold over Chinese politics by exposing government scandals, defending pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, and praising Taiwan's free government compared to the authoritarian rule of the Chinese mainland. But with each passing decade, the Communist Party continued to tighten its grip on the city. Demonstrators took to the streets determined to preserve the city's political independence, and Apple Daily publicly backed them, leading to multiple threats being directed against Jimmy. But despite numerous warnings and opportunities to flee Hong Kong and go into exile, Lai chose to stay and fight, personally taking to the streets with hundreds of thousands of other protesters. And amazingly, it was the CCP that was forced to back down. It appeared the protesters had won. But then COVID hit. And amid worldwide lockdowns, the Chinese government imposed a new national security law on Hong Kong. And this law completely gutted free speech in the city. And almost immediately, the government began using it as a tool to settle old scores with political adversaries. Jimmy Lai was arrested while government agents raided the Apple Daily's offices and forced the newspaper to shut down. In December 2022, Jimmy was sentenced to nearly 6 years in prison for the crime of standing up for freedom of speech and free elections. And that is where Jimmy remains. When asked why he didn't flee when he could, Jimmy responded that it would have sent the wrong message. And that, perhaps more than anything else, explains why the CCP wants to destroy him. Because they thought they had ended the last attempt at revolution by turning the cameras off when a brave young Chinese man stood in front of a tank at Tiananmen Square. But all they did was help to create Jimmy Lai. And now Jimmy is determined to create the next generation of people who will stand up for freedom, whatever the cost.